In early November, U.S. President Donald Trump signed a series of bilateral trade agreements with Malaysia and Cambodia, with hundreds of provisions following the photo, including a small clause that the entire region is discussing. Any agreement with a country threatening core U.S. interests could lead to immediate termination. Washington calls it a security protection clause. Diplomats call it by another name, Poison Q, a political poison pill wrapped in trade paper. And the shocking article in Financial Times on November 6, 2025 revealed a terrifying truth. The U.S. cleverly inserted a poison pill into agreements with ASEAN countries like Malaysia and Cambodia. This is a power game wrapped in the shell of law. Let's face it, under Trump, trade is no longer equal cooperation but a political tool. This giant chessboard, where every clause could be a trap, has completely changed how small countries interact with a superpower. Trade agreements are not bridges of cooperation but battles of wits. Trump is famous for floating faster than handshake speed. He views FTAs as bargaining scenes, and the final winner must always be America. What Washington calls rules of the game are essentially rules of the flag holder and the winner. We no longer a partner, you. So what is the poison pill that Financial Times mentioned? The U.S. inserted a clause allowing Washington to unilaterally terminate the entire trade agreement with the signing if that country dares to cooperate with a third party that everyone understands is China. This clause doesn't explicitly name China, but uses extremely vague and extremely dangerous phrases. The agreement to be cancelled if it seriously threatens U.S. national security or harms essential interests. Sounds reasonable at first, but who will define what constitutes a threat? Who determines what is harm? There's only one person, U.S. President Donald Trump and the U.S. government. Experts believe such clauses are so broad that they allow America to back out of agreements whenever they want. They turn law into an excuse to impose power. In other words, this clause is like signing a house purchase contract, but the other party keeps the right to reclaim the house anytime just because they no longer like the neighbor. Malaysia and Cambodia eagerly signed what seemed like a major victory, aiming a golden ticket to the U.S. market. But according to observers, it's actually a one-way ticket with no return. The biggest consequence is these countries have handed over the key to their economic sovereignty. Once signed, they no longer have full authority to choose future partners. Suppose Cambodia wants to sign additional agreements with China to develop industrial zones, or Malaysia cooperates with Beijing in oil and... This isn't actually new. Canada and Mexico have had to swallow similar poison pills. What's the result? Both countries have to tread carefully with every... Why is Vietnam, a major U.S. trade partner, absent from the signing list? This isn't because Washington forgot, nor because Vietnam was excluded. On the contrary, Vietnam was the one proactively applying, or more gently put, a timely dodge, extremely strategic. While many countries are racing after the shadow chosen by America, Vietnam chooses purposeful silence. And that silence resonates louder than any declaration. Vietnam understands very well the rules in the superpower's chess game. The more hasty, the easier. Sovereignty is more valuable than deterrence. Vietnam's greatest strength lies in understanding that strategic autonomy, an agreement that might bring billions in profit, but losing national self-determination cannot be bought with any amount. If Vietnam signed, just one vague clause like threatening U.S. essential interests would be enough for Washington to arbitrarily cut off the entire agreement. Then not only trade would be affected, but political standing would also be constrained. All cooperative relationships with China, Russia, or Iran or any country America dislikes would be considered risks. From an equal partner, Vietnam would be pushed into having to ask permission before acting. This is something a country that has experienced too many historical ups and downs to gain independence will never accept. Chasing President Trump. With experience signing and implementing numerous free trade agreements, Vietnam fully understands what a truly mutually beneficial agreement looks like and what a contract designed for control looks like. Vietnam's absence is actually a very calculated presence, a timely dodge when all eyes in the region are watching. This action is evaluated by international analysts as showing character, not noisy, not but. While many countries in the region view agreements with the U.S. as a ticket to the future, Vietnam remains sober enough to recognize
The price for this ticket is national economic sovereignty.
the strategy of silence is the most effective way for Vietnam to maintain strategic balance. Vietnam doesn't choose sides but chooses position. We maintain a distance close enough for cooperation but far enough to avoid being swept into a power war, not being pulled into the game of choosing friends and abandoning enemies that Washington is trying to set up in Southeast. Thanks to this approach, Vietnam maintains good relations with both the U.S. and China, remains the center of regional supply chains, and preserves its valuable neutral position during a period of strong global polarization. Returning to the agreements proposed by Mr. Trump from the perspective of Poisson-Pew technique, which is an anti-takeover tool in business, making opponents pay dearly if they want to acquire. Now is being applied by the U.S. in diplomacy, turning economic contracts into political tools. For Malaysia and Cambodia, these terms are like blood signatures, exchanging tax reductions for supervision. After the meeting, rumors spread that an official whispered they were allowed to sell more goods to the U.S., but had informed the U.S. in advance in negotiating with Beijing. Financial markets don't care about these implications, only seeing capital pouring strong. But behind the numbers, the autonomy of small economies is gradually being traded away. Sovereignty measured by tariff percentage. Since 2020, Washington has linked trade with security as two sides of the same coin. Each bilateral agreement is a loyalty test. Beijing responds with unconditional cooperation, opening new FTA packages worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The two poles deploying the same. In the area between these two poles is Southeast Asia, countries being both pulled and suspected. When the U.S. introduces Poisson-Pew clauses, ASEAN faces not only the question of who to but also a harder question: how much space remains for autonomy? Scholars call this the era of conditional contracts. Trade agreements inherently don't just talk about goods, but also about politics. Negotiators are forced to read between the lines to understand what America's core interests,
How threats are defined and who is the judge.
A Malaysian electronics company that just signed an export contract to the U.S. had to stop its investment for fear of violating hidden clause. ASEAN suppliers are required to declare component origins to ensure no connection to China. Even a Singapore bank had to cancel payment cooperation with a Chinese company,
Just fearing cross-sanctions.
In financial circles, people say the US dollar is no longer just a payment instrument. The USD has gained an additional function as an alliance
That's allowed to buy.
who. As for small countries, even if unwilling, they must sign because refusal means being excluded. In Phnom Penh, Cambodia, scholars discuss conditional freedom. They realize that an agreement can open trade doors but can also lock diplomatic paths.
Kill immediately. It makes governments dependent on others.
China quickly exploits the gap, proposing increased infrastructure investment and imports of rice.
As currency is the message, we don.
But this unconditionality itself becomes another condition. One must know this vortex traps ASEAN. Avoiding dependence on the U.S. means falling into Beijing's orbit, while balancing makes the world is turning small countries into laboratories for a new type of power for contract. Trump doesn't need to occupy territory. He just needs to make every partner side commit that's not absolute power now lies not in troop numbers but in the number of binding clauses. But this game has limits. When all partners are tied to the same rope, the system becomes rigid. A small shock like a change of administration in Washington can cause all agreements to collapse simultaneously. Poisson-Pew protects America from opponents, but also makes America hostage to the very clauses it wrote.
Like the journey? Subscribe and join the next expedition.